That's what they did.
Yeah, he said they just pulled them out.
Yeah.
Because I said, didn't they try to fill them? He said, oh no, they just pull them.
Yeah. Well, and that's what they did in the Navy when I was there too.
Did they?
Oh yeah.
Boy, yeah, they pulled Bill's and they pulled his.
Yep. Well, we got kids that had never ever seen a dentist.
Ever see a dentist?
Yeah. So they'd wind up pulling all their teeth. Yep.
You know, stayed in.
Yeah. Oh, a lot of it.
Whoever the admiral or somebody was, I forgot what it was, that drove around in a Jeep and had a dog.
Yeah.
Do you know who I mean?
No, I don't. I know who you mean. It's that was the one that Bill worked for. Yeah. The general, yeah, General Patton. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Listen, I gotta go. I gotta get ready for my class. Did Dave go to his doctor appointment? Whoops.
I didn't mean to interrupt your call. You have to unmute yourself. I can't hear you.
There we go.
I said I didn't mean to interrupt your call.
No, you didn't at all. Actually, I was ready to get off the call. I gave some information to my sister,
Okay.
and we had finished our conversation. So when I saw you pop on, I thought, my gosh, I want to get on and talk to you for a few minutes.
Okay, good. We missed you last week. You normally tell us when you aren't going to be on.
You know what happened? We had some friends and I got tied up in other things. And Sue, when you get to be my age, sometimes dates and times just slip by.
I understand. I missed a Zoom meeting at 1 o'clock one day last week. It was on my calendar. It was just gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have Apple. It's on my Apple calendar and I get a 30-minute notice. And boy, I'll tell you what, it just rolled right by. And, what's so horrible is I feel so guilty about missing these classes. I
Right.
do a couple of day self-guilt trip.
Well, you didn't this time, but I think next week, Fred is going to be traveling.
Oh, is he? Okay.
And so I think that we are skipping next week. Harold, is also that your understanding?
Harold's probably having his dinner.
I don't know. Are you eating your dinner?
Nope.
Nope.
No, actually, I got to run out, leave about 6:20 and go to the synagogue for a in-person board meeting. And they're serving
boy.
pizza. So
Why does it have to be in person?
because that's what the president has declared.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fair.
Yeah.
For some of us anyway.
Uh-huh.
That are on this Zoom
Special than
session.
others.
Oh, look who's here. Chris
Hey,
and
gang.
Rachel. Boy, Chris. That
And they're
beard is
together.
becoming-
They're not even on different Zooms.
Right. So
Chris, I
Yeah.
thought you were going to have Rachel trim your beard.
how do you know she hasn't?
Uh,
I think she did.
If she did,
took
it
off
doesn't
it's
look
got a
very
little bit more shape to
professional.
it.
No, I won't do it until I need to talk to my boss to see what the rule is.
Chris, I'm going to ask you a question that may be embarrassing. When
Sure.
I was working, people with beards that were not, lengthy like yours, because of the rotating shafts on equipment and pumps and all of that, they were required before they could get into that area to kind of like tie them up and put something around them so they couldn't get their beard hung up in a pump shaft.
Yeah, thankfully I don't work around rotating assemblies like that, but you're right. once I do get into the work situation and find out what's required, if it needs to get trimmed up, it'll get trimmed up. And I do keep some like hair elastics around to keep it contained if it needs to be.
Right, yes,
Yeah.
like ponytails.
You got
Well,
it.
I mean, it's a real safety issue.
Oh, it totally is. And
Any kind of rotating equipment.
well, rotating equipment, and that's why you can't have them have a beard when you're in the military because you need to have gas masks and stuff on. So depending on the PPE required at the sites, I may have to shave it, so I can wear the proper breathing apparatus and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
we'll see.
another thing. I forgot about all that. Yeah.
Yep. You can get a a face mask that goes under your neck a little bit, so I can still have some of a beard. But we'll see what's required.
Yeah.
Couple of
Well, anyway, it
the
looks
chefs
great.
here have beards, and they have like a case that the beard goes into because they can't be around the food with the beard.
Yep.
So it goes over their head and the beard goes into it like a pouch.
Yep. It's like same thing with well, anybody in food service does that, but bikers do it. They have a leather piece of leather with snaps on it that goes around their entire beard, so it's not whipping behind them and getting
Right,
stuff when they're
right,
riding their bikes.
right.
So
And does it say Hell's Angels on it?
yes, exactly. Or outlaws or whatever your
Whatever
jacket is.
turns you on, right, Chris?
Yes, ma'am, you got it.
Well, where's our leader?
It's
Oh,
not-
it's not quite 5:30.
We got time. That's the advantage of coming on a little bit early. We get to chat.
Yeah,
Rachel,
exactly.
I read your uh, thesis on the color blue again, and I read it
Yeah.
in much more detail. That was so good. You did a lot of work to put that together.
Yeah, it was interesting. I like to learn about it. It was fun.
Yeah. Well, I was reading some things about Mesopotamia,
Okay.
going back 4,000 years ago, and that there was a reference in there about the color blue.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what prompted me to go back in and read that real carefully.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think to make the color blue was a pretty special thing back in the day.
Yeah. We take those things for granted, don't we?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, even up through the founding of this country, indigo was a big thing for that color blue. I
Yeah.
mean, it wasn't an easy thing to make, but once they figured out how to synthesize the colors, synthetically in the lab, life got different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody's growing indigo anymore.
Well, I've
Nobody's
never seen a blue shell like that either.
Right.
Right, exactly.
In the Philippines and all around the South Pacific, you see lots of weird shells, but I never saw a blue one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's Fred.
There we go. Hi.
Hi, Fred. I'll be right back.
Okay, we got the whole team back.
Yeah,
Okay.
the class is all sitting here at attention upright at their desks, ready for our professor.
Okay, yeah. Actually, we got a lot of stuff tonight. This is one of those Shabbats during the year when you read a double parsha. So, this coming Saturday, we'll actually be reading two parshas and finishing off the book of Numbers. And so the reading will actually start with chapter 30 in Numbers.
Fred, didn't you say you were going to be away next week before?
Yeah, I will be away next week. Yeah,
So no
So,
class.
no class
No
next
class
week.
for 2 weeks after tonight.
Right. Okay. So, and again, this takes up a whole lot of different things. The first one actually is one of the laws for taking vows and oaths, and this is basically the first 17 verses in 30. So, if somebody wants to read through verse 17 on chapter 30.
Oh, I'll
So-
give it a try.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
Gonna
So Moses spoke to the Israelites just as Adonai had commanded Moses. Moses spoke to the heads of the Israelite tribes, saying, "This is what Adonai has commanded. If a householder makes a vow to Adonai or takes an oath imposing an obligation on himself, he shall not break his pledge. He must carry out all that has crossed his lips. If a woman makes a vow to Adonai or assumes an obligation while still in her father's household by reason of her youth, and her father learns of her vow or her self-imposed obligation and offers no objection, all her vows shall stand and every self-imposed obligation shall stand. But if her father restrains her on the day that he finds out, none of her vows or self-imposed obligations shall stand, and Adonai will forgive her, since her father restrained her. If she should become someone's wife while her vow or the commitment to which she bound herself is still in force, and her husband learns of it and offers no objection on the day he finds out, her vows shall stand and her self imposed obligations shall stand. But if the husband restrains her on the day that he learns of it, he thereby annuls her vow which was in force or the commitment to which she bound herself, and Adonai will forgive her. The vow of a widow or of a divorced woman, however, whatever she has imposed on herself shall be binding on her. So too, if while the husband's household she makes a vow or imposes an obligation on herself by oath, and her husband learns of it, yet offers no objection, thus failing to restrain her, all her vows shall stand, and all her self-imposed obligations shall stand. But if her husband does annul them on the day he finds out, then nothing that has crossed her lips shall stand, whether vows or self-imposed obligations. Her husband has annulled them, and Adonai will forgive her. Every vow and every sworn obligation of self-denial may be upheld by her husband or annulled by her husband. If her husband offers no objection from that day to the next, he has upheld all the vows or obligations she has assumed. He has upheld them by offering no objection on the day he found out. But if he annuls them after the day he finds out, he shall bear her guilt. Those are the laws that Adonai enjoined upon Moses between a husband and his wife, and as between a father and his daughter, while in her father's household by reason of her youth.
Yeah. So basically, notice they say oaths and vows. And they actually, the rabbis later decided that they were two different things. That a vow was a conditional thing. A vow was saying, if God will do this, I'll do that. An oath is just saying unconditionally, I'm going to do this. I'm binding myself to do this no matter what. And in general, the later rabbis were very much against taking vows of any kind. And the horrible example they always gave was Jephthah's daughter. The episode in the book of Judges where Jephthah tells God, if you give me victory in battle, I will sacrifice the first thing that greets me when I come back to my home. And he gets the victory in battle. And when he comes home, his daughter runs out to greet him, and he ends up having to sacrifice his daughter. So that was their attitude. The idea, of women being able to have their vows vetoed by their father or their husband, this is an attitude that actually persisted into the modern world, really. The idea that, that women, can't make big decisions on their own. They have to have a responsible male, to supervise them. This held well up into the 20th century. They can't vote because they can't really think logically about things, and the important things have to be left to their husbands, unless that she's divorced or widowed, and then she is on her own and she can do her own thing. The one interesting thing in here, though, that they don't mention is what about a spinster, a woman who's never married? There's no mention of that. And apparently that was almost unknown in ancient society. And the reason we know that is there's no word for it. There isn't any word in biblical Hebrew for a woman who is never married. You know, if a girl is a baby or a toddler, she's a yaldah. If she's a preteen, they call her a na'ara. If she's a teen, which means she's now of marriageable age, she's an alma. And then when she's married, she's an isha. And then if she's divorced, she's a gerusha. If she's widowed, she's an almanah. Yeah, they have words for all that, but there's no word that corresponds to the English word spinster, for a woman who has never married. And apparently, basically, you were going to get married whether you liked it or not. Your father basically gave you to somebody, and he wasn't going to let you hang around the house forever. So it probably a society where it was very, very rare to have an unmarried adult woman.
Hmm.
So,
Then
real,
going on, yeah.
real quick, Fred. So, what kind of oaths and vows were these women taking? I mean, it must. I mean, so were they that bad that the husband didn't want anything to do with
Yeah,
it? So,
yeah, that's the weird thing about this. It doesn't really specify what any of these things are. We know that they were oral oaths because it's whatever comes out of his mouth, he has to do. But we really don't know. It can be something as bad as I'm going to sacrifice the first thing that meets me when I come home, like Jephthah did, or it could be the Nazarite vow. I vow that I'm going to be a Nazarite for the next 3 months or 6 months or something. It could be that, or I'm going to abstain from eating this or that. As a sort of a giving up something for Lent type of kind of thing. But it doesn't really discuss that at all. It just says, of course, there's a big, huge chunk of text from the Talmud, that gets into all kind of nitty-gritty details about this. But the Torah itself just pretty much leaves it open.
Fred, this wouldn't
Yeah,
be for such activities as I'm going to go get water every day from the well, or I'm going to do a certain house cleaning task because
it could be. It may be that I'm going to be nicer to my wife from now on, or we don't really know what these oaths could have been. Um, the most famous, probably, of all the post-biblical uh, things that concerns oaths is the beginning of the Yom Kippur service. It starts with Kol Nidre, all our vows, and it's basically an Aramaic legal formula that says we want God to forgive us in advance for all the oaths and vows that we're not going to be able to keep in the coming year.
Hmm.
And it's been a very controversial kind of prayer because if you were in the past tense, it would make more sense. If you were saying, "Forgive us for all the oaths and vows that we weren't able to keep for some reason over the past year," but it's written in the future tense. And actually, anti-Semites, particularly in the Middle Ages, used to use the Kol Nidre as a sign you can't trust Jews. Every year they go into their synagogue and they ask God to forgive them for all the lies they're going to tell, in the coming year. Uh, the main theory that most modern rabbis have about Kol Nidre is that it probably arose during the time of the Spanish Inquisition in the 15th century in Spain, where Jews were forced to at least outwardly convert, to be able to stay in Spain, even though they might secretly still be practicing Judaism. And so the purpose of Kol Nidre was what you really were saying when you recited Kol Nidre was over the next year. I'm going to have to go to church every Sunday. I'm going to have to recite prayers I don't mean. I'm going to have to say that I believe in things that I don't believe in to keep my cover, basically, stay out of the hands of the Inquisition. And I'm asking God to forgive me in advance for all these things, all these lies I'm going to have to tell over the coming year. But in general, there's really in the Talmud, there's a very, very negative attitude toward oaths. They say you really shouldn't have to take oaths. If you intend to do something, do it, but don't take formal oaths. In fact, even in rabbinic courts, the judges are supposed to do everything they can to come to a decision without swearing anybody in. Not tempting anybody to commit perjury. So then then we go over to chapter 31, and like the Torah usually does, it just jumps from one subject to another, in an unrelated sort of way. Um, but chapter 31 talks about the war with the Midianites. Um, and this is, the first part basically is the first 8 verses, 1 through 8. Somebody wants to read those.
Sure, I'll go ahead.
Okay.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Avenge the people of Israel on the Midianites. Afterward, you shall be gathered to your people. So Moses spoke to the people, saying, Arm men from among you for the war, that they may go against Midian to execute the Lord's vengeance on Midian. You shall send 1,000 from each of the tribes of Israel to the war. So there were provided out of the thousands of Israel 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 armed for war, and Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 from each tribe, together with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, with the vessels of the sanctuary and the trumpets for the alarm in his hand. They warred against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses and killed every male. They killed the kings of Midian with the rest of their slain, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian, and they also killed Balaam, the son of Bor, with a sword, and the people
Yeah.
of Israel took
Yes.
captive. Oh, you just
Yeah,
said they.
stop at
Yeah,
that
yeah.
point. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, basically what this is about, remember the parsha before last, we read about the incident of Baal Peor. The Midianite women seduced the Israelite men and got them to worship Baal. Um, and so this is God's revenge on that. He says, wipe out the Midianites. But this is kind of really weird because, it's maybe one of these other examples where several different stories are being woven into one. Because up to now, the Midianites were the good guys. I mean, Moses is married to a Midianite woman. It was Jethro, his father-in-law, who took him into his tribe and sheltered him when he was running away from Pharaoh. After he had killed the Egyptian. And so, but here, you get another Midianite story. So you have the good Midianites, with Jethro, the earlier story, and now you have the bad Midianites, whose women are seducing the Israelites. And then there's really a third story because supposedly they wiped out all the Midianites. They killed every Midianite male. And but then later in the book of Judges, you have Gideon fighting the Midianite. And so there appear to be 3 different stories about the Midianites, that are all kind of pushed into the same space. The other strange thing here is the last verse. They killed Bilam, the son of Beor. And what's he doing with the Midianites? He's not a Midianite. And the rabbis had to come up with an explanation about this. So there's a midrash. Bilam was hired by Balak, the king of Moab, to curse the Israelites, and he ends up blessing them instead, and gets sent home in disgrace. And according to this midrash, in order to get his revenge upon the Israelites, because he didn't really want to bless them, he was the one who went to the Midianites and hatched this plan to have the Midianite women seduce the Israelite men. So this whole incident with Baal Peor was really instigated by Bilam. And here, he gets killed along with the Midianites during this. Although again, the Torah text itself, doesn't say anything about this. The rabbis just sort of invented this midrash to try to explain, what Bilam is doing there, getting killed with the Midianites.
Fred, did I understand you correctly? It said that Moses was married to a Midianite?
Yeah, his wife Zipporah, was the daughter of
Okay,
Jethro,
and
one of the
then,
chiefs of Midian.
yeah,
You know,
that
when he
be
kills when he kills the Egyptian and he has to flee from Pharaoh, it's the Midianites, who rescue him really and let him live among them. He spends basically the mid part of his life, about 40 years, as a shepherd, as part of the Midianite
right.
tribe. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But he believed in God, and the Midianites worship Baal.
Well, these Midianites did, but if you remember in Exodus, after they've left Egypt, Moses' father-in-law Jethro comes to visit him, in the Sinai desert. And and he says, I've heard about all the great things that Adonai did for you. And it makes it sound as if
Sound like
Jethro
a
might be,
conversion. Yeah,
it may be a conversion. Yeah. And Jethro gives Moses advice, about how to delegate authority and set up subordinate leaders. You know, and Jethro is one of the good guys in the Bible. And so, apparently there's several Midianite stories that from different sources that have all gotten mixed up in here. But then the rest of the story really is pretty nasty, and that's verses 9 through 18. Somebody wants to read that.
Sure. The Israelites took the women and their non-combatants of the Midianites captive, and seized as booty all their beasts, all their herds, and all their wealth. And they destroyed by fire all the towns in which they were settled, and their encampments. They gathered all the spoil and all the booty, human and beast. And they brought the captives, the booty, and the spoils to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the Israelite community leadership at the camp in the steppes of Moab, at the Jordan near Jericho. Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the chieftains of the community came out to meet them outside the camp. Moses became angry with the commanders of the army, the officers of thousands, and from the officers of hundreds who had come back from the military campaign. Moses said to them, You have spared every female. Yet they are the very ones who at the beginning of Balaam induced the Israelites to trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, so that the community was struck by the plague. Now therefore slay every male among the non-combatants, and slay also every woman who has known a man carnally. But spare every female non-combatant who has not had carnal relations with a man. You shall then stay outside the camp 7 days, everyone among you or among
Yeah,
your
stop at that point. That's Yeah. So this is really one of the nastier parts. I mean, this is really basically genocide. First they're told to kill every adult male, everyone fighting with Moab. Then they kill all the male children. And then they kill all the women, who are not virgins. So the only ones who are left can be married by the Israelite men. And since, descent was patrilineal in those days, these women could be absorbed into the Israelite community and their children, would be Israelites. But this was really one of the first examples, I think the first example in the Bible of actual genocide, of trying to wipe out the entire Midianite people. There's one modern rabbi, I kind of like his commentary. He says, this was one of the rare times, though, in the Torah where God does not command Moses to do this. The usual formula is, and the Lord spoken to Moses saying, then he gives him a command. But that's not here. And so he says this is something that Moses instigated on his own. That was not God's idea, to murder all the children and all the and most of the women. And it could be that Moses, really is at the end of his life at this point. He's been told by God he's not going to go into the promised land. In fact, he's told at the very beginning of this chapter, after this war is over, it's time for you to die. You'll be gathered to your people. This is the last job you're going to do for me. And Moses was probably in a pretty nasty mood, and this was not a happy time for him. And this may have been Moses' idea, not God's will, to do this to the Midianite people. Then the other aspect of the war comes next, And that as you remember before, several parshes before, they were talking about the laws of ritual purity, where everybody who was involved, being around a dead body, is ritually impure, and they're all kind of cleansing things. And this is really what they go into next. That those are verses 19 through 24. If somebody wants to read that.
You shall then stay outside the camp 7 days. Every one among you or among your captives who has slain a person or touched a corpse shall cleanse himself on the third of the seventh day. You shall also cleanse every cloth, every article of skin, everything made of goat's hair, and every object of wood. And Eleazar the priest said to the troops who had taken part in the fighting, "This is the ritual law that the Lord has enjoined upon Moses." Excuse me. Gold and silver, copper, iron, tin, and lead, any article that can withstand fire, those you shall pass through fire, and they shall be clean, except that they must be cleansed with the water of lustration. And anything that cannot stand the fire, excuse me, you must pass through water. On the seventh day you shall wash your clothes and be clean, and after that you may re-enter the camp.
So again, this, that water of lustration you were talking about, that's the red heifer. That's the ashes of the red heifer dissolved in some water. That was, the cleansing agent for people who are ritually unclean because of being around a corpse. It's interesting though that for the among ultra Orthodox Jews, that is part of the kashrut laws. For instance, if you're getting new dishes or new implements for your kitchen, anything that's metal or porcelain or can stand fire, typically you will use something like a blowtorch, and go over it with fire in order to make it kosher. Anything which you can't use fire on, then you wash under hot or cold water. So this actually was taken as also part of purifying utensils in a kosher house, the way you would do it. And then the last part of the story, starts with uh, verse 25 and goes all the way to the end of the chapter. And this is basically just counting up all the loot. It's just a long inventory of all the loot that they got from this battle. And again, really, it's hard to believe a lot of these numbers. For instance, if you look at verse 32 in that chapter. Verse 32 says, "Now the prey over and above the booty which the men of war took was 600,000 and 70,000 and 5,000 sheep." 675,000 sheep. All right, who counted the 675,000 sheep? I mean, these numbers have got to be pulled out of the air. There's no way.
Fred, they had very good inventory data.
Do they? Yeah. But a lot of the other numbers are really the same thing. That they couldn't have possibly actually counted all this stuff. And then it goes on to chapter 32, and they totally change the subject again. And here is where they're getting ready now to cross the Jordan. The battle with the Midianites was really the last thing that they're going to do, on the east of the Jordan. But then the tribes of Reuben and Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh come to Moses with an unusual kind of request, and that's 1 through 15 on chapter 32. Someone wants to read that.
Sure. And the Reubenites and the Gadites had much livestock, very numerous. And they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, and look, the place was a place for livestock. And the Gadites and the Reubenites came to Moses and to Eleazar the priest and to the chieftains of the community, saying, Ataroth and Dibon and Jazer and Nimrah and Heshbon and Elialah and Sebam and Nebo and Baon, the land that the Lord struck down before the community of Israel, is livestock land, and your servants have livestock. And they said, If we have found favor in your eyes, let this land be given to your servants as a holding. Do not make us cross the Jordan. And Moses said to the Gadites and to the Reubenites, Shall your brothers come to battle, and you sit here? And why would you hinder the heart of the Israelites from crossing into the land that the Lord has given to them? Thus your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land, and they went up as far as Wadi Eshcol, and saw the land, and they hindered the heart of the Israelites from coming into the land that the Lord had given them. And the Lord's wrath flared on that day, and he swore, saying, These men who have come up from Egypt, from 20 years old and up, shall not see the soil that I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, for they have not fulfilled my behest. Said Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they fulfilled my behest. And the Lord's wrath flared against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the eyes of the Lord came to an end. And look, you have arisen in your father's stead, a breed of offending men, to add still more of the Lord's flaring wrath against Israel. For you would turn back from him, so that he would continue to leave them in the wilderness, and you would destroy all this people. And they
And
approached.
what they're no, stop at that point. What they're talking about, the Gilead is the area east of the Jordan, and it was actually the Amorites had it. And earlier on, we read about, I think it was Og, king of Bashan, and forget the other guy's name, king of Heshbon. You know that they defeated them and took that land. Gilead is about where northern Jordan would be on a modern map. Uh, it, it, it was the only part of ancient Israel that was actually east of the Jordan. And of course, what Moses' first reaction to all this is, they're basically they're cowards. They're just like the last generation. They don't believe they can defeat the Canaanites. They're afraid to cross the Jordan. They just want to stay where they are. They're doing this all over again. 40 years later, the next generation is doing what the last generation did. But then from verse 16 through 27, this is the answer that they give Moses. Somebody wants to read that. It's 16 through 27.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Then they stopped up to him and said, We will build here sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children. And we will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, while our children stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until the Israelites, every one of them, are in the possession of their portion. But we will not have a share with them in the territory beyond the Jordan, for we have received our share on the east side of the Jordan. Moses said to them, If you do this, if you go to battle as shock troops at the instance of Adonai, and every shock fighter among you crosses the Jordan at the instance of Adonai, until God has personally dispossessed the enemies, and the land has been subdued at the instance of Adonai, then you return, you shall be clear before Adonai and before Israel, and this land shall be your holding under Adonai. But if you do not do so, you will have sinned against Adonai, and know that your sin will overtake you. Build towns for your children and sheepfolds for your flock, but do what you have promised. The Gadites and the Reubenites answered Moses, Your servants will do as my Lord commands. Our children, our wives, our flocks, and all of our other livestock will stay behind in the towns of Gilead, while your servants, all those recruited for war, cross over at the instance of Adonai to engage in battle, as my Lord orders. Then Moses gave instructions concerning them to Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the family heads of the Israelite tribes. Moses said to them, If every shock fighter among the Gadites, and the Reubenites cross the Jordan with you to do battle at the instance of Adonai, and the land is subdued before you, you shall give them the land of Gilead as a holding. But if they do not cross over with you as the shock troops, they shall receive holdings among you in the land of Canaan. The Gadites and the
I think
Reubenites.
you can stop at that point. It's just very repetitious. But basically, what they're saying is, no, we'll fight. We'll go over, in fact, as the advance guard. We'll help you take the land of Canaan. But when it's over, when you're settled, we're going to go back east, if there are holdings in Gilead. There's one interesting point. You use the expression shock troops, and the Hebrew word that's translated as shock troops is chalutzim. It's kind of a rare word. It only appears here, and it really doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible. And it's usually translated as shock troops or advance guard or the first to go somewhere. And it was revived again in modern Hebrew in the 19th century, in the 1880s and 1890s, when the first Zionists came to Palestine to start to reclaim the land. They took that word for themselves. They called themselves chalutzim, pioneers, the first to go, the shock troops. And they took that word from this section over here of the Torah.
Fred, this made reference to servants going as shock troops. Did I remember that correctly?
Well, where is that?
It's up a few lines. While your servants, all those recruited, 27, all those recruited for war cross over at the instance of Adonai to engage in battle, as my Lord orders.
Yeah, they're committing themselves to be the first to cross the Jordan. That's they're saying, we're not hanging back because we're afraid of the Canaanites. We don't want to fight. We just like this land better on the eastern side. And
So are they considering themselves the servants, or are they committing their servants to fight?
oh no, they consider themselves they're servants of God in a sense.
Okay.
They're serving God by helping conquer the land of Canaan, even though when the battle's over, they want to go back, to the eastern side of the Jordan, which Moses says is okay.
Okay, that makes sense then, because I read it when I was reading it initially. I was thinking if they pledged to send their servants, but it's really they're
Oh no,
going as
they're
servants
the
as
ones
God.
who are
Yeah.
God's servants, doing this. And then chapter 33 is I think it was Rachel. I think you were the one that asked if there was any place that listed all the places they went on the 40 years in the desert. Yeah, this is it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at chapter 33, they actually list every single place, from leaving Egypt all the way over to being on the plains of Moab. I think it's 42 different places that they read. And I'm not going to ask anybody to read this because that would be cruel and unusual punishment. Okay.
Especially Sue.
I was thinking of myself.
Yeah. There's one theory, why would they want to go to all the trouble of listing all these places? And one theory is, like if you're on a long car trip, you have a bunch of kids and, are we there yet? Usually you tell them, well, it's only 2 miles to this place. Now we're here. It's only 3 more miles to this place. It's one of the ways of kind of keeping them happy in a long trip.
But the significance of all of these places is that they're now in the process of welding together Israel as an empire or as a cohesive area.
Well, some of them are really very important places. Obviously, places like, when they camp at Sinai, obviously,
Yes, yeah.
or the place, Mariva, where they were quarreling over not having any water, or, Baal Peor, where they had the thing with the Moabite women. Yeah, there are about a dozen of these names that are really significant. Others are not mentioned anywhere else except here, and nobody really knows, where they would be in a modern map. It's kind of a mixture of things. Okay. And then the other thing, of course, is settling on the boundaries of a land, that they're going into. And this is kind of interesting. There are 4 different places in the Torah where they describe what the boundaries of their land is going to be, and all 4 are different. So This is one of them here. Well, it's a big deal now, particularly in Israel right now, because Netanyahu's coalition is made up of some extreme right-wing parties. So they claim that the borders of Israel should be the biblical Israel. They want the West Bank because that's Judah and Samaria. It wasn't in biblical times. But if you want Israel to have the borders of biblical Israel, you have to decide which biblical borders you're talking about, because the Bible's not consistent about it. This is the first description of what the borders are going to be, and it's really verses 1 through 12 in chapter 34. If someone wants to read that.
Sure.
Sure, I'll go ahead. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, commands the people of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you for an inheritance, the land of Canaan as defined by its borders. Your south side shall be from the wilderness of Zin alongside Edom, and your southern border shall run from the end of the Salt Sea on the east, and your border shall turn south of the ascent of Abrakim and cross to Zin, and its limit shall be south of Kadesh Barnea. Then it shall go on to Hazaradah and pass along Asman, and the border shall turn from Asman to the brook of Egypt, and its limit shall be at the sea. For the western border, you shall have the great sea and its coast. This shall be your western border. This shall be your northern border. From the great sea you shall draw a line to Mount Hor. From Mount Hor you shall draw a line to the Lebo Hamath, and the limit of the border shall be at Zedad. Then the border shall extend to Ziphron, and its limit shall be at Hazra Enan. This shall be your northern border. You shall draw a line for your eastern border from Hazar Enan to Shepham, and the border shall go down from Shephron to Riblah on the east side of An, and the border shall go down and reach to the shoulder of the sea of Chinnereth on the east. And the border shall go down to the Jordan, and its limit shall be at the Salt Sea. This shall be your land as defined by its borders all around.
Actually, there are some modern archaeologists that have sort of traced these borders based on at least we know where some of these places were. And essentially, if you start from the lower end of the Dead Sea, you go southwest down to what's now called Wadi al Arish, which is the border of the Sinai with Egypt. Then you go up the Mediterranean coast. That's going to be the west border. And it goes way up north. It actually goes up into northern Lebanon. And then it goes eastward into Syria in the area of Damascus. And from Damascus, it goes down southwest again to the Sea of Galilee, then over to the Jordan. And then you follow the Jordan around till it goes back to the Dead Sea. So actually, this is way bigger, than the present state of Israel. This is about maybe a third of Syria and about half of Lebanon, being included in this. Besides Gilead, which would be maybe a third of what Jordan is today. And there's only two times really in Jewish history when they actually occupied that much territory. One was during David and Solomon. David and Solomon actually increase the borders of Israel to encompass all of that. And then again, in the 2nd century BCE, under the Hasmonean king, the successors of the Maccabees, for a few years at least, they did push the Israel's borders out to approximately what they describe here. But those are the only 2 times in Israelite history when they actually control that much land.
Do
That almost
modern
sounds like it's two
Israelis,
oh,
I'm sorry, do
oh,
the
I was going
modern
to say,
Israelis want this much land now?
It depends who you talk to. If you talk to the right-wing settlers parties, yeah, they think the West Bank is part of biblical Israel, which it's kind of really one of the ironies of Israel. There are a lot of these guys would gladly give Tel Aviv to the Arabs if they could have Hebron. Because Tel Aviv is an amazing city, but it has no historical or cultural or religious significance for Jews at all. It was not a biblical city. It was built in the 1920s. Nothing happened biblically in that area, where most of the Bible really happened on what's now the West Bank. It's what the Netanyahu's people would now call Judea and Samaria. And so they most non-religious Israelis are happy with the border they have. They don't believe that Israel should rule the entire or should annex the entire West Bank. But that really is what Netanyahu's cabinet wants. And I think the reason the fighting is still going on in Gaza, way past probably when it should, and why there's so much violence in the West Bank is because these are people that really want to annex both those areas. They want the biblical Israel. Most non-religious Israelis don't. That they because basically the only way you could have that is to expel all the Palestinians.
yeah.
I mean, that would basically be ethnic cleansing. There's no getting around it. And it's really the main political divide in Israel today.
If just mentally kind of trying to figure out what that landmass would look like, that's almost 2 or 3 times the size of Israel as it is
It
today.
would be, yeah. But actually, there's another description later on that says that the eastern border should be at the Euphrates, which
Oh
would
boy.
give Israel a pretty good chunk of Iraq also.
We
It
call that
depends, it
Greater
depends which,
Israel.
yeah, that's what they do call it, is Greater Israel. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And let's see.
Well, I have to run to the synagogue. Well, actually drive.
Good.
So,
Good on you.
Okay.
yep. So I'll see y'all when we return in 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
2 weeks.
Okay, buddy.
2 weeks.
2 weeks,
All right.
Sarah.
Okay. So there is one more subject that this parsha takes up though, and these are the cities of refuge. And that's chapter 35, which is kind of an interesting institution. If somebody wants to read 1 through 15 on chapter 35.
Go for it.
And the Lord spoke to Moses in the steppes of Moab by the Jordan, across from Jericho, saying, Charge the Israelites that they give to the Levites from their secure holdings towns in which to settle, and pasture land for the towns around them you shall give to the Levites. And the town will be theirs to settle, and their pasture lands will be for their cattle and for their goods and for all their beasts. And the pasture lands of the towns that you give to the Levites are to be 1,000 cubits all around from the wall of the town. And you shall measure outside the town the eastern limit 2,000 cubits, and the southern limit 2,000 cubits, and the western limit 2,000 cubits, and the northern limit 2,000 cubits, with the town in the middle. This will be their towns' pasture lands. And the towns that you shall give to the Levites, the 6 towns of asylum, you shall give for a murderer to flee there. And in addition to them, you shall give 42 towns. All the towns that you shall give to the Levites will come to 48 towns, they and their pasture lands. And the towns that you give from the holdings of the Israelites, from the many you shall give much, and from the few you shall give less, each according to his estate of which he takes possession, shall he give of his towns to the Levites. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelites, and you shall say to them, When you cross over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall set out for yourselves towns of asylum you shall have, and a murderer may flee there, one who strikes down a person in errance. And the town will be an asylum for you from the avenger, and the murderer will not die until he stands before the community for judgment. And the towns that you give, 6 towns of asylum you shall have. 3 towns you shall give beyond the Jordan, and 3 towns in the land of Canaan. Towns of asylum they shall be. For the Israelites, and for the sojourner, and for the settler in their midst, these 6 towns shall be an asylum for everyone who strikes down a person in errance to flee there.
Yeah. So basically, the Levites again have no area of their own, so they're kind of going to be given towns in the middle of the other tribes' areas. And the cities of refuge really, this is not like sanctuary, like if the classic movies, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It was the medieval church. If you could flee to it and you'd be safe from the civil authorities. But that's not really what this is about. Basically, they at that time had a very primitive justice system. If somebody killed somebody in your family, it was incumbent on somebody in your family to take vengeance on them. The state didn't punish murder. It was a personal thing, between families. They call them, in Hebrew, it's called the Goel Hadam, the Avenger of Blood. And this is a way to stop. This could be a family feud. They kill one of ours, we got to take out one of theirs, but then they're going to kill one of ours. It's kind of a Hatfield and McCoy type feud that you're going to get. So the idea is, not if somebody has killed someone else, but not deliberately, as more we will call manslaughter or negligent homicide. He's not going to be given sanctuary. All it means is he can stay in the city until he can be tried. In other words, the avenger from the killed man's family can't enter the city and take him away. He stays in the city until he has a hearing. And so this is really all sanctuary means. I mean, if he's found to be guilty, he's not allowed to stay in the city. Um, and then the rest of the procedure, though, is from verses 16 through 29. If someone wants to read that.
Sure. Anyone who strikes another with an iron object so that death results is a murderer. The murderer must be put to death. If one strikes another with a stone tool that could cause death and death resulted, that person is a murderer. The murderer must be put to death. Similarly, if one struck another with a wooden tool that could cause death and death resulted, that person is a murderer. The murderer must be put to death. It is the blood avenger who shall put that murderer to death. That is, who shall put the person to death upon encounter. So too, if one pushed another in hate or hurled something at the victim on purpose and death resulted, or if one struck another with the hand in enmity and death resulted, the assailant shall be put to death. That person is a murderer. The blood avenger shall put the murderer to death upon encounter. But if a man pushed without malice, aforethought, or hurled any object at the victim unintentionally, or inadvertently dropped upon the victim any deadly object of stone, and death resulted, though not being an enemy and not seeking to harm, in such cases the assembly shall decide between the slayer and the blood avenger. The assembly shall protect the killer from the blood avenger, and the assembly shall restore him to the city of refuge to which he fled, and there he shall remain until the death of the high priest, who was anointed with the sacred oil. But if the killer ever goes outside the limits of the city of refuge to which he has fled, and the blood avenger comes upon him outside the limits of the city of refuge, and the blood avenger kills the killer, there is no blood guilt on his account. For he must remain outside his city of refuge until the death of the high priest. After the death of the high priest, the killer may return to his land holding. Such shall be your law of procedure throughout the ages in all your settlements.
Yeah. So basically, they're distinguished between what we would call murder and manslaughter. But it's interesting, though, if the guy is found guilty, he's not executed by the state. He's just turned over to the Avenger of Blood. So it's still it's better than what they had before, but it's not what we would call modern justice. I mean, it's still personal. It's still personal vengeance. Um, the and then it goes over the attitude toward the death penalty in general, and that's 30 through 34. I'll go ahead and read that. Whoever kills any person, the murderer shall be slain at the mouth of witnesses, but one witness shall not testify against any person that he die. And this was a settled law procedure in Jewish courts ever since then. No one could be convicted on the testimony of one witness. It had to be at least two witnesses. Um, Moreover, you shall take no ransom for the life of a murderer that is guilty of death. He shall surely be put to death. In other words, you don't have the option of life without parole or any other punishment. The punishment for murder has to be death. Which is kind of interesting because the rabbis of the Greco-Roman period were very much against the death penalty. There's actually a saying in the Torah, or rather in the Talmud, that a Sanhedrin that put one man to death in 70 years was called a bloody Sanhedrin. And, I first read that years ago. I thought, how liberal, how humane that is. Then you think about it again, that, it's a great place to be a murderer. They put so many procedural roadblocks against getting a conviction of a murderer. Because, the only way you could not put a murderer to death is not find him guilty. If you found him guilty, you had no other option as far as what the sentence was. But the thing that made it work, though, was that under Roman rule, all major felonies belonged to the Roman courts. The rabbinic courts were not allowed to try these people anyway. The Romans basically limited the rabbinic courts, to religious matters or commercial matters that the Romans didn't care about. But any major felony like murder, the Romans would always take jurisdiction. So the rabbis really got to have it both ways. They could be as liberal and humane as they wanted to be, and the Romans wouldn't let any murderers run around loose. So it worked out.
So, Fred, the prior to Roman times, then, if someone was a murderer, it's the persons whose family was recipient or whoever, and then they were charged with killing that person.
Yeah,
There was
he
no
was the
options.
avenger of blood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, so it sounds like that'd be hard to enforce that kind of rule.
Well, it really is a kind of anarchy. I mean, what if it really was an accidental killing, and and uh, and but the guy takes his vengeance and kills him anyway. Well,
Yeah,
your family may want to settle the score by killing him, and then he goes back and forth. And so, one of the reasons for these cities of refuge is to stop these feuds from being carried on from generation to generation, and try to break the cycle of that. We don't know really when the thing about the blood avenger finally was dropped. We know that
hmm
by the Greco-Roman period, that wasn't operative anymore. By
hmm
that time, there was more of a settled legal system,
sure.
and people were tried and punished by the courts. So sometime in between the biblical time and the Greco-Roman time, the whole blood avenger thing, finally faded out. Well, it wasn't carried any further. And then the last part of that's kind of interesting. It said, if he that who is guilty, he shall surely be put to death. Then verse 32, you shall take no ransom for him that is fled to his city of refuge, that he should come again to dwell on the land until the death of the priest. So you shall not pollute the land wherein you are, for blood it pollutes the land, and no expiation can be made for the land for the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it. And you shall not defile the land in which you inhabit, in the midst of which I dwell. For I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the children of Israel. And this is kind of an old belief. You remember way back in Genesis when Cain killed Abel, and God says, "The blood of your brother Abel is crying out to me from the ground." There was really a belief, literally, that the blood of a murdered person polluted the land, and it affected all the people that lived there, even even people that had nothing to do, with killing the guy. In fact, later on in Deuteronomy, we'll find there's a law that if you find a murdered man just lying in a field and no one knows who killed him, you measure the distance to the cities around that. The cities that's closest to him, there's this ritual. They have to go through this ritual of atonement, even though they are not the ones who did the crime. Nobody knows who did the crime, but still the fact that someone has been murdered, in a sense, pollutes the whole land, and there has to be a ritual of atonement for it. And again, the other background for this is the covenant of Noah. After the flood, when God tells Noah, he who sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. So, so the rabbis really were caught in a kind of dilemma. The Bible is very unequivocal about the penalty for murder is death. There's no question the Bible wants capital punishment. But the rabbis were always trying to some way to get around it. And they didn't really have any other options, for somebody who was convicted of murder.
When that, Fred, that really places a high value on life.
Yeah, that it really does. Yes.
Yeah.
And you have to remember there was a very high standard for getting a conviction, because if you have to have two eyewitnesses, which is the minimum that would be required, how often does a murder take place in the presence of two witnesses? You have to remember, there's no forensic evidence. There's no fingerprints, no DNA, no financial records, no security camera footage, none of the stuff that you see on Law and Order, it was available then. Basically, either you had to have two witnesses that actually witnessed the murder, or that's it, you couldn't convict. So it was probably, you'd guess, probably pretty rare to get a conviction in those days.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll meet again in 2 weeks, and we'll be into the book of Deuteronomy at that point.
Oh, we will. Okay,
Thanks,
great.
and have a good trip. Be safe.
Thanks, Fred.
Okay, see you
Have a
guys in
safe
2
trip,
weeks.
See you later.
Fred.
Safe
Thank you.
trip, Fred.
Okay.
We'll see you in 2
Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Bye, all.
See ya.
Bye.